from a diocesan and ministerial setting. This past summer, we spent working together in the Diocese of Davenport in the Office of Evangelization. Patrick is the Director of Evangelization for the Diocese of Davenport, and I'm Sarah, and I'm currently at St. Louis University working on a Master's of Theological Studies degree. This summer, I worked as a project associate for the diocese, and our task was to explore how parish, school, and chancery offices in our diocesan area could use social media as an instrument of evangelization, especially for reaching out to those who are no longer affiliated with the church and young adults in particular. So we also want to frame this session by saying evangelization as we see it is simply sharing the good news and meeting people where they're at on their faith journeys. So we began this summer with an audit of every single parish, school, and diocesan office's social media pages, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So to audit these entities, we used Edward Braxton's 6 modes of conversion as a way to categorize each social media post. While working through Braxton and using his modes of conversion as a framework, we found that it lacked specificity in one area. And so this gave rise to our interest in building upon Braxton.
So 2 questions give rise to this paper. First, how can we as Catholics in ministry engage and nurture people of faith through the medium of the digital world and through social media in particular? And second, how can we do this in a theologically informed and strategic approach? These questions may seem intuitively important, but beyond intuition, there's a statistical warrant which highlights the weight we should give these questions. At the outset, let us juxtapose 2 sets of facts. First, young people spend a remarkable portion of their day-to-day life navigating the digital world. Not counting school or work, the average 18-year-old spends 7.5 hours a day in the digital world. 2.5 hours of that is on social media. Extrapolating this out, the average 18-year-old spends 17.5 hours per week, the equivalent of a part-time job, on social media. That is 910 hours or 38 days per year. Assuming 7 hours of sleep per day, 15% of all waking hours is spent on social media. Second, we would like to highlight findings from the Springtide Research Institute. Springtide aims to listen and attend to the lives of young people, ages 13 to 25, as they increasingly explore issues of faith, spirituality, and religion outside of traditional institutionalized spaces. Springtide notes that Generation Z is the, quote, loneliest generation. This is a generation that longs for community and belonging, but the people of this generation are having a hard time forming community. Springtide notes that, quote, 1 in 3 of our young people feel completely alone much of the time. 45% feel as if no one understands them. Nearly 40% have no one to talk to and feel left out. Furthermore, only 66% of 13 to 25-year-olds have 3 or fewer meaningful interactions on a day. Important for us to note is the fact that participating in religious groups has virtually no protective effect against the experience of loneliness. Over 37% of young people who attend religious groups still say they have no one they can talk to. These statistics are just scratching the surface that young adults are facing. This is the landscape that we have in mind when we ask the question, how do we engage and nurture people of faith through the medium of the digital world and on social media in particular? This is a frankly devastating landscape, and it highlights the importance of proceeding in a theologically informed and strategic approach. In the first part of this paper, we turn to Bernard Lonergan's 3 dimensions of conversion. In the second part, we turn to Edward Braxton, who built on Lonergan in his explanation of having 6 dimensions of conversion. In the third part, we build on Braxton with a 7th conversion. For this, we will briefly draw on Sarah Coakley and Robert Doran. Finally, we will spend some time demonstrating the usefulness of these 7 dimensions of conversion as a framework for how one engages on social media. Lonergan gives us 3 conversions: intellectual, moral, and religious. These conversions are grounded in his epistemology and expressed in the language of self-transcendence. From the world of immediacy, one transcends oneself experiencing intellectual conversion so that one lives evermore in a world mediated by meaning. The ongoing process of learning and critical realism are involved here. From living life according to the criteria of self-satisfaction, one experiences moral conversion, and so that one lives in a world according to the scale of values. These conversions are not permanent, and while they are interrelated, they are not necessarily sequential. As Lonergan writes, quote, man's questions for intelligence, for reflection, for deliberation reveal man's capacity for self-transcendence. But capacity, hankering, intermittent trying are one thing, stable achievement is another. Such stable achievement seems to occur when one falls in love. While religious conversion is also not permanent, God's free gift of love, which is operative in religious conversion, quote, dismantles and abolishes the horizon in which our knowing and choosing went on, and it constructs a new horizon in which the love of God transvalues our values, and the eyes of love transform our knowing. It is otherworldly, falling in love. These three conversions mark genuine theological engagement. While theological engagement might not be a named concern of the average peruser of social media, it is nonetheless relevant. If I might adapt a quote, it may be the case that the alternative to having conscious theological commitments isn't to have no theological commitments. Rather, the alternative to having conscious theological commitments is to have bad, unconscious theological commitments. Everyone on social media has theological commitments, no matter the kind or depth of religious or spiritual commitments they may explicitly name for themselves. We can use social media to enrich and make explicit those commitments. This brings us to the work of Edward Braxton and his book, The Wisdom Community, a framework and a program for renewing communication and understanding between priests, bishops, theologians, and people in the pews, which he wrote in 1980. And you can see the sticker in the upper right hand of the book that it was $2.50. It was worth every penny. So with that.
And then some.
Yes.
So Edward Braxton begins with Lonergan's three conversions and expands them into 6 modes of conversion for self-transcendence. According to Braxton, there are religious, theistic, Christian, ecclesial, moral, and intellectual conversion. As Braxton explains, while he speaks only of religious, moral, and intellectual conversion, I distinguish religious conversion from theistic conversion, specify Christian conversion to provide the necessary focal symbol, and add ecclesial conversion to include the important communal dimension of conversion. So Braxton understands and articulates these conversions as moving from an original horizon to a new horizon. So in religious conversion, one moves from alienation and ambiguity to a new horizon of seeing holy mystery in the world in which meaning and purpose is affirmed, even if not fully understood. In theistic conversion, one moves from a view that the world is full of impersonal mystery to an understanding of a personal God as the author of this holy mystery and as a deeply personal God. Christian conversion recognizes that this God is made fully manifest on earth through the person of Jesus Christ. In ecclesial conversion, one moves from an individualized religion to embracing a community and a tradition. Ecclesial conversion has to do with liturgy, invitations to participation in sacraments, and devotions such as rosaries, divine mercy chaplets, feast days, etc. Moral conversion facilitates the practicing of a moral life in which one's deeds are consistent with authentic values. Finally, intellectual conversion moves one to a new horizon of a holistic view of truth. So Braxton's model for conversion as self-transcendence through the transformation of horizons lacks specificity in one area. We find this lack to be significant and necessary to clarify. As it stands, currently in Braxton's model of theistic conversion, one moves from an awareness of an impersonal holy mystery to an affirmation of, and even surrendering to, a loving and personal God. As Braxton writes, theistic conversion is a loving surrender to a loving reality that can now be explicitly named God. Here is where we need to make a distinction. The warrant for identifying the 7th conversion comes out of a specific pastoral need. Only 60% of Catholics believe in a personal God. The remaining 40% that means of Catholics believe that God is merely a transcendent figure. Articulating a 7th conversion, relational conversion as we will call it, is needed to create space in people's imagination for an immanent God. While in theory, theistic conversion represents a real and important conversion that takes place in people's lives, the two elements of theistic conversion, one being an affirmation of God that is the author of Holy Mystery, and two, acceptance that this God is personal and immanent, are distinct. What we propose is to name theistic conversion as the movement from a horizon of impersonal mystery to an impersonal God. This is the move in which one can shift from an unthematized affirmation of meaning to proclaim that there is now a creator of this world. Although an individual may not yet understand that this God who created the universe loves and is fully involved in their life. The move from impersonal mystery to impersonal God, theistic conversion, is distinct from the move from an impersonal God to one that is immanent and personal, relational conversion. I want to explain an example here. I was having a conversation with a friend a couple weeks ago, and he was saying that he could conceive of a God that rules the universe, or at least set the universe in motion, but he could not conceive that that same God really and intimately cared about him as an individual. So relational conversion consists of an individual moving from that original horizon of accepting that there is an impersonal God who seems distant and ambiguous and out of reach maybe, to a new horizon that this God who created the seemingly infinite cosmos has a deep love and care for this singular individual. And in the face of this overwhelming love, this individual enters into a personal relationship with God. So this leads us into Sarah Coakley, who gives language to our relational conversion in her text, God, Sexuality, and the Self. In this text, Coakley offers a prayer-based approach to the Trinity. She articulates that the goal of her text as giving an exemplification of a life in which one enters into divine desire and the love of God. And Coakley identifies that a participation in the divine is an incredibly transformative experience. See our relational conversion. She speaks of the Trinity as being incorporative. She writes that the incorporative aspect of God, specifically within the Trinity, saying, in the incorporative model, the Holy Spirit is construed not simply as extending the revelation of Christ, nor even merely as enabling Christ's recognition, but is actually catching up the created realm into the life of God. She uses Romans 8:26 as a springboard for this approach within which we are drawn into sonship, participating in God. Coakley asserts that this is what we are called to as adopted children of God. This is the movement of relational conversion. Coakley sees Paul's use of, quote, in Christ, to mean our participation in the divine drama in which Jesus occupied, calling out Abba in the garden. This is the new horizon that relational conversion facilitates, the ability to cry out God as Abba and enter into a deeply personal and loving relationship.
Though Coakley did not use Lonergan in God, Sexuality, and the Self, we want to note briefly that the language Coakley uses regarding the Trinity seems compatible with the language used by Robert Doran in his own building on Lonergan. Doran writes, "The state of grace is for Lonergan an interpersonal situation, where the founding persons are the divine three, and where we are all invited to allow ourselves to be caught up in prayer and in life, individually and community, in the circumcision of divine life, through participation in the emanations of word and love that constitute God." And just as a brief aside, and as a previous presenter noted regarding Doran's psychic conversion, we're aware of his psychic conversion and the positive response that Doran received from Lonergan regarding this idea. We're still considering how psychic conversion might be facilitated concretely through the medium of social media, but our consideration is very much at the beginning stages at this point, and we don't have any concrete ideas in concrete terms of what that looks like. With the framework of the 7 dimensions of conversion and language of relational conversion in mind, what we are after is setting up the conditions where conversion is most likely to take place. This is what we are after in our Catholic school systems and in our parish life activities. So too in the realm of social media. We want to facilitate the landscape, give people nudges, hints, and guesses, create the space for them to recognize, discern, and follow where the Spirit leads. As Pope Francis has said, the digital world is a public square. So the question remains for us, how do we exist in this space well? How do we exist in this space in a distinctively Christian way? So having clarified the 7 dimensions of conversion, we will now demonstrate the concrete application of these dimensions to social media content in a ministry setting. To do this, we will show examples of social media posts from various Christian entities which facilitate each of the 7 dimensions of conversion. And here's the framework that we are proposing.
So first of all, we have religious conversion, and this stays the same as Braxton's model. So it is the move from alienation and radical ambiguity to an understanding that there is a holy mystery, that there is purpose in the world. This is also from Braxton, but this is modified now for our framework. We see theistic conversion as moving from this impersonal holy mystery to an understanding of a transcendent God, but this God still may seem distant and vague. Next, we have our relational conversion, which moves from this impersonal God that seems unaffiliated with the individual to a personal God who is intimately involved in this individual's life. And then Christian conversion stays the same within our framework and Braxton's framework. And this is the move from seeing an inadequate communion between God and humankind, and then recognizing that Jesus is the full manifestation of God in the world.
We then have ecclesial conversion from Braxton, which stays the same, which is this move from an individualized or privatized vision of religion to recognizing that, yes, religion is personal, but it's also communal. And so one recognizes that one belongs to a community of faith, to the people of God. Moral conversion, the same in Braxton and Lonergan, this move from selfish indifference, the criteria of life being self-satisfaction, to shifting to the scale of values. And then finally, intellectual conversion, critical realism, the ongoing learning process. And so concretely,
yeah, we want to give a couple of examples here from real social media posts that are going on in the Christian sphere. So we have a couple of examples here. As you can see on the left, this is a link to a link to an article that talks about slowing down to find refuge in the woods. So while this is not explicitly about God or Jesus, this is definitely bringing about an understanding of holy mystery in the world. And you can see this in the quote from Maya Angelou, "Everything in the universe has a rhythm, everything dances." So it's drawing people into understanding that there is a purpose, there is a meaning in life, and it's facilitated by this holy mystery. Second, we have our version of theistic conversion, which draws someone from an understanding of impersonal holy mystery in the world to an understanding of an impersonal God who might seem a little cosmic at this point. So here we have 2 examples of posts that talk about the character of God as being king over the whole earth and the Alpha and the Omega. So this is very much a transcendent view of God in theistic conversion. And we have relational conversion, which we have put forth here. And so we have some posts here that draw someone from a view of God as impersonal and cosmic to a view of God that is intimate and immanent. So we are not what we do, we are not what we have, we are not what others think of us. Coming home is claiming the truth. I am a beloved child of a loving creator. So this is obviously drawing us into a personal relationship with God, along with the other 2 posts, as you can see here. Let's invite the Lord into our feelings, a very personal relationship going on. And then Christian conversion, as we see in Braxton and our own frameworks, is the movement of seeing Jesus as the Christ. And so we have a few posts here that you can see that are based around Easter, clearly a Christian conversion element, and then also a story from the gospel of one of Jesus's miracles.
Then again, ecclesial conversion, this movement from a privatized view of religion to a public communal. On the left, we have just an image from the celebration of Sunday Mass from a parish, as well as examples that incorporate feasts of the liturgical year. In moral conversion, on the left, we see this prayer vigil around the death penalty. In the middle, this article about an artist's Black Pieta, a call for justice. And then on the right, a daily reminder during Lent, fast from gossip, feast on affirmations. And then finally, intellectual conversion. The example on the left is about a series on Laudato Si, and then the example on the right is an invitation to a Theology on Tap event.
So with this is the closing of our presentation. We'll revisit. This is our framework for the conversions of digital evangelization. If anybody missed anything in the first part, at this point, we'll open it up for questions if anyone has any. Maybe stop sharing something.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick and Sarah. Yeah, for opening up these different types of conversions. Are there questions for them from the audience? Other ideas, insights? Please. Yeah, Alfredo. Can you, your microphone is very muted. We can hear something, but it's very digital.
Maybe if you type it into the chat, that might be helpful. The microphone.
Yeah, it sounds like chipmunks. Yeah, the only alternative, Alfredo, is if you'd want to type it into the chat message, we could definitely do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Patrick Nolan, though, you want to jump in now?
Yeah, sure. While Alfredo's maybe typing that out or figuring out his audio. Thanks, Patrick and Sarah, for your presentation. One quick kind of thing that comes to mind when hearing this, the kind of breakdown or the working out of religious conversion here into, I think it was 6 subcategories, right? Of I don't have the screen in front of me anymore, but the only thing I reflect on, and this is an initial thought, so please, it may not be totally coherent, but it has to do very much with a particularity here. And what we see a lot in Lonergan's thought for both in insight and method and all the writings is a kind of question here of general methodology, something that isn't specified within particularities. So if you could this model, for example, be used in interreligious dialogue to some degree? It's obviously, as your missions of Christian evangelization and as being written out of a methodology informed by Father Lonergan, a Catholic priest, it's going to have that focus. But if we want to look at larger methodological movements towards human authenticity, is there a way we could potentially take what you're kind of adding on or extrapolating out of religious conversion and express it in ways for those of other faith traditions to move towards human authenticity? Because the only thing that's I'm a little concerned about at the moment is that the ambiguity of religious conversion in Lonergan somewhat allows for that openness. And by making movements into relational conversion, into Christ conversion, into ecclesiastical conversion, and this could be my misinterpretation of it, but it's restricting authenticity to a particularity. So just any thoughts on that?
Sure, that is a great question. And yeah, as you know, Lonergan, in his notion of religious conversion, says this is not an exclusively Christian phenomena. God expresses God's love to all humanity. It would seem that among the these 7 different conversions, I think Christian conversion would be the only one that is exclusively Christian. One might argue that ecclesial conversion is also exclusively Christian, but I can see it functioning analogically in any given faith tradition. So I think there's a lot of overlap between what the way that we built on Braxton and possibilities for interreligious dialogue as well.
I think also I would say, as we built out this framework, we still see our extrapolations from Lonergan. These first 4 categories come together, and they are like successive, but then moral and intellectual function differently. And so we still see all of these as going into religious conversion in Lonergan's view. And so in that regard, it can also function towards more people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine?
Can you hear me? Can
Yep.
you hear me?
Now
Okay.
we can. Yep.
Early on in your talk, you talked about coming to consciousness, and that if religious understanding was not conscious, it was bad. You used the term good and bad, I guess, in that. Am I getting that right? It was early, and so I'm not sure if I caught it right, but I just wondered if I got that right, number one. And number two, it always bothers me when the qualitative life and the idea of religious order hangs on Western thinking. And I just don't think it does. But I don't know if that's what you're saying either. But there is a dialectic to be had there, number one. And number two, I just think mystery needs a lot of room here. So anyway,
Yeah,
my impression.
I really appreciate that question. And putting a box around mystery is usually not a great idea. That portion of the talk was intended to play on the idea, this idea that the alternative to philosophy isn't no philosophy, it's bad philosophy. And so the making by way of analogy, applying that to theology, we don't want to go around saying like, you have a bad theological position, like pointing fingers. That's not particularly useful. We do find it useful, though, to raise to people's awareness the fact that they do have explicit as well as implicit theological commitments, because once we get that out on the table and into the light, we can engage in the dialectical process.
I think also a part of this is when we say good, we mean intentional as well. So a good theological commitment is not necessarily that there's a right or a wrong theological commitment, but that there's intentionality in that. And so I think that's what we're trying to highlight here.
Thank you. Very provocative, thoughtful. I really appreciate it. The only thing that bothered me was that that the beginnings of religious has to do with a question, an openness to and a question of, but not a position, as it were. So that there's nothing bad about that, or what Lonergan calls latency, the latent. But anyway, a lot to think about. Thank you very much. I'm so impressed by you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Got it?
Can you read that?
Yeah.
So much of social media is self-reaffirming what one believes. What is its potential for conversion, though?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think
We can both.
Yeah, go ahead. You start.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so like this notion of an echo chamber in social media and the internet in general, and confirmation bias and the algorithms on social media that reinforce the echo chambers that are already existent. Those are difficult barriers to try to break or to work across. One like concrete organization that is doing this well is Grotto Network. Some of the example posts that we had were from Grotto Network. So they speak the values of church and Christianity and theology in the language of pre-evangelization and young adults. So they'll use the language of spirituality or mindfulness and not the language of prayer or contemplation. And so they're, but beneath the surface, they're like drawing people in the direction of Christianity. So that's one concrete way. I would also want to not like sort of give up because of the algorithms. Like people are spending hours and hours a day on social media. So we got to give it a try. But the algorithms will change in a couple years again. And so we'll have to adjust course along the way.
I think also with this, this framework that we've presented here, religious conversion and theistic conversion kind of falls into this pre-evangelization category. So meeting people where they're at. And so part of that, I think, can kind of like break the algorithm in a way, but we want to, like, from a diocesan and ministerial perspective, reach out to people who we know usually wouldn't be in our sphere of influence or usually wouldn't be interested in what we have to say. So that's why when we put up the example post, there was a post about how to find peace on, like, in the woods or like on a walk. So that's how we're able to kind of fit what we have to offer into these algorithms, is presenting it as not in a kind of deceitful way, but like in, look, ministry is way more than just talking about Jesus, or, faith, spirituality is more than participating in a faith community. It's also seeing God in the wilderness, or like seeing your spirituality play out in your moral values. And so different ways to shop sustainably was another post that we came across in our auditing that can definitely play into these different roles as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alfredo, for adjusting to get your question across. Any other questions from the audience? Maybe as Brian did, as taking prerogative of being the director, just like to probe a little bit more. I think I'm going to pick up on what Catherine is saying too, is the sense of like a receptivity, and is there a receptivity in the youth of today as they engage in social media, and because in some ways, like, what leads to all these like transformational changes is grace. I mean, like the whole idea of like the religious conversion of God flooding our hearts with his love, but there's the assumption that there is an openness of heart, a willingness to receive something. Is social media a dulling of one's senses and intellect so as to be closed off to reception, or is it an opening, and is there a hunger that's deep within? And I guess I just kind of, what's your thought on that? It's like, what will lead to these conversions, or is it a lost cause because of just a closed-mindedness and a hard-heartedness?
Yes. To both, like, the move in the direction of digital communication, full stop, has shortened our attention spans, like going back from just like all print media to radio to television to internet. So like along the pathway, this has impacted the attention span of people. So that's like, on the one hand, a reason to not engage, because then it's just continuing the practice, which isn't not the practice. It's enabling the platform, which facilitates shorter attention spans. But at the same time, people are going to be there whether we like it or not. So we might as well meet them where they're at, and then over time encourage and facilitate people's more thorough engagement with religious content. Did that end? Was that a direct response to
I
your question?
appreciate that. I mean, it's just like whether we like it or not, people are there. So can we use this as a form of evangelization? And can this and really is ultimately, can God? I mean, it's like, will God's grace work through even social media? I mean, and that it's like an open these hearts and minds. But it's like, you're right. It's like there's something that they're seeking something by going there. And so can what gets out there be either good or bad? And like the hope is that some of it is good that leads them to be drawn into these conversions. Maybe just one more. Peter, do you have a question?
Yes. First of all, I think what you're doing is tremendous. And have faith and go deeper. Now, Lonergan started with science and came to faith finally in the love. Now, do that for everybody. So what you do, in my opinion, don't be afraid of death and love. That means the techno-ethics involved, both in matters of death, abortion, end of life, and love. In marriage, outside marriage, don't be afraid of it. Now, art is the great thing. Art is a great thing. You need people who can do good animations, little films, or whatever. The techno-ethic must lead to creation. Now that's a kind of a pre-sacrament. Your faith will be coming out in what you create. And that's what will be attractive to people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We will keep your admonition in mind.
Well, thank you. Any other questions or thoughts? Maybe just one last thought for me, that you talked about like bringing in the psychic conversion, and I think there would be a lot there to dive in, especially with regard to this idea of, I mean, like breaking open those blocks and barriers that are, I mean, like deep within the psyche of like either fears or shame or guilt that people can be wrestling with, and like how to do that, which then would allow them to come to a sense of receptivity and openness to a movement of grace. Catherine, you have a last thought?
Well, if we're giving admonitions, one from having taught a few classes, beware of the evangelical aura. There's nothing worse than somebody feeling like they're being sold something,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and not just sold, but just over doctrinized, you know, like you're closed and they need to be open, kind of thing, you know. And I found in teaching that you have to accept the longevity of teaching and the fact of like letting a bird go and not knowing where it's going to go, you know. And I'm sure you maybe I'm telling you something you already know. Forgive me if I am, but the thing is to develop an art of raising questions that they can answer for themselves. They take those home. We take those home. We take the questions home that people ask us, and they act like poison darts in us. Sometimes, not enough, I think, but sometimes. In the sense that they eat on the question. Has its way of eating on you, you know, in your subconscious, and finally it comes out to insight someplace where the teachers have gone way away, you know, or the evangelical. But if I have people in my life who want to evangelize me all the time, in the right wing thing, drives me absolutely crazy. I've cut off relations with them because I find that so offensive, and so as an experience, you know, I've experienced from that end, and so it's kind of a teaching thing for me to know that. Anyway, it really takes a long time. Took a long time for me to develop an art of raising the right questions for the particularity of the student. You know, let them something that they have to remember. And of course, the biggest secret in teaching, of course, is that the teacher's the one who learns. So there you go. Anyway.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And I think what you're pointing out too is the difference between proselytization to evangelization. And evangelization, as we see it, it may have some negative connotations in certain people's experience, but as we see it, is just meeting people where they are and asking those questions. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick and Sarah, for your presentation, and yeah, getting us to think about how to evangelize, truly, to get out the good word.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.